right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Going around the room, joined by a very special guest, but starting with the least special person here, Fred. No, I'm kidding. My name's Dan Gerstein. I work with Pistol Shrimp, and we are working on Free Stars, Children of Infinity, the sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters. Fred.
I'm Fred Ford. I actually worked on the Ur-Quan Masters many, many moons ago and many other games over my career. But today we're talking about the Ur-Quan Masters.
And my name is Tim Cain, and I've been doing game development forever. And the Ur-Quan Masters was a huge influence on a game I made called Fallout. So I
Heard of
can
that
talk
one.
about
Yeah,
I can talk about that influence for hours and hours if you'd like me to.
We would love that. Actually, and not just that, I would speak for the people who in the future will be watching this. They would love that because I think there's a Venn diagram I could draw somewhere that has a pretty good overlap of people who grew up with PC games and have some of that. So, but we're here for you. So I'm curious, like, what was your experience of the Ur-Quan Masters? And when you say like you want to talk about it for hours, hey, where do you want to start? I don't want to lead the witness here.
Well, I got introduced to it just for the melee combat with a friend of mine who loved doing the melee combat and wanted someone to fight. But I started playing the single player campaign and had so much fun with it. And I would argue with people. I was at Interplay at the time that it was really a role playing game. And I don't know if you guys view it that way, but
in
I
a
tell everybody it's a
sense,
role playing
yeah.
game. Yeah, it's got everything. It's got an upgradable, you progress your ship, and it's got dialogue and exploration and itemization. It's got everything you want from an RPG. And I loved it, and I love the humor, and I love the music. And I used to tell people, I want to make something like this that's funny and dark, and people will talk about 20 years later, and it's got to have good music too. And I tried to do all of that with Fallout. But it was literally the Ur-Quan Masters that made me think, I want to do this. I want to make something like this. So it's exciting to talk about it because that was 1992.
Yeah. Thank God
Yeah.
it's been 30 years or we wouldn't be doing this. Yeah, 30 years that people
Yeah.
are still talking about it.
Yeah. That's it's people don't understand just like what the early 90s was like. And to have an open world game like that to play in was just, it was mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I tell people they say I often get questions about how did you decide to do that? And back in those days, well, you were in the early days of making games too, but there were no genres. You just made it up as you went along, kind of. And uh I don't know whether I think our games typically straddle what most people call multiple genres, which makes them hard to classify, but um yeah, there were no recipes to follow back then.
That actually kind of like that because with no genres, you just made a game with the features you wanted and people could enjoy it. You didn't have to go, oh, shoot, this is an adventure game, so I shouldn't have combat. Or it was
Yeah.
refreshing to think like that. But
Yeah, well, I mean, were you like when you picked it up and played it, did you experience it with genres in mind? Did it strike you as, oh, this is exactly like did you like RPGs, before
oh,
you even picked it up and like immediately grafted the RPG? Oh, that's what's going on here onto it, or how was that for you?
yeah, I mean, I was huge into RPGs, tabletop games, and I had an Atari 800 as a teenager, and I played the Ultimas on it. And the funny thing was, when a friend said, "Do you want to play this game?" He had it. He wanted to do what I called space combat because there was that old Atari game, Space Combat. He goes, "It's just like that, but way better." And that's what he would want to play for hours. And I'm like, well, what's this other? Why aren't you clicking on this part of the menu? And he goes, we're just going to do melee combat. Super melee was what it was called, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just going to do that. And I'm like, okay. So I just got my own copy. I bought a copy and then I went home and I'm like, I'm going to play the campaign. And then every day I'd come in and I'd tell him what I was doing. And he's like, yeah, but I really like the spaceship combat. And I'm like, well, there's tons of it and tons of other things. Just try it. And then he finally played it. It was funny that I had to talk him into doing it. But for me, it was just, I think I always viewed it as an RPG through the RPG lens, because especially the dialogues, the fact that you met characters and they had dialogues and they remembered you and the story advanced because of it. To me, it's like, this is an RPG. You can put anything on it you want, any visuals, you can put it in any setting, but this is a role-playing game.
Yeah. I mean, when the questions we gave you to ask of the aliens ranged all over the spectrum, so you could kind of choose your approach to the aliens.
Yeah. And there were mysteries I wanted to know about, like the rainbow worlds. What were they? Why doesn't anybody know what they are? And I think you could pay. You went through the Mel Normé, right? Yeah. I still remember. I mean, it's funny how this is just burned into my head from 30 years ago, 31 years ago. My hair was dark.
Is it like an old wound, or is it like a happy place to go?
It is just it's still an open, dripping wound. No, it's just everything. The thing that got me about it was everything about that game clicked and made sense together and worked well together. I mean, the way the aliens talked, all the alien races were different and alien. Was it the Ors who kept calling you happy campers?
Yeah.
I was like, what is up with these interdimensional goldfish things? But I tried to imagine how you wrote those dialogues, like what headspace you'd get into.
Well, there were a number of different writers, and the guy who actually sort of nurtured the seed of how the Ors spoke was he got the happy campers from, you remember Vice President Dan Quayle, right?
Yes.
At one time there was like a disaster in Samoa or something, and he went over there and gave a speech and he called them happy campers. And so that was what started the Ors sort of being unintelligible.
I mean, I remember their dialogues. I remember the ships like the Bakunk, because they would insult you and then feed off that energy.
Yeah,
and to me, that was the most hilarious thing.
That was my voice. Yeah.
You were the one going worm.
Yeah.
And the Siren Penetrator, which was a little racy.
Yes.
But just the idea that it would pull crew out of the other ship, and that's how it hurt them. I was just, my friend Mark Harrison was the one who got me into it. And I turned to Mark one day and I said, where did they think of these things? I mean, I don't know if I want to ask you where that one came from.
Well,
upstairs in an office in Nevada. No, anyway.
Yeah, there's a funny story about the name of the ship was that ship was in the first installment, and so it was 1989 in late October, and we were trying to give it its name. We knew it was Cyrene something, but and I uttered the word penetrator, and at that moment, the earthquake of 1989 struck, and and Paul instantly teleported to the parking lot outside. I don't know how he moved that fast, but he was gone.
He just left you?
Yeah, he was just gone. And I followed him out shortly after that. But so either we're not sure how to interpret that sign, but it is what it is at this point.
Was that the one that was a 6.1?
It was the one where the Bay Bridge collapsed. And okay. I don't remember its exact magnitude. I want to say 7 something, but.
Well, I moved out to California in the fall of 87. And my whole family lived in Virginia, and they're like, it's going to fall into the ocean. And I'm like, That was in August of 87. And in October of 87, there was the
Northridge
earthquake. Yeah. And it was in the middle of the night, but I had people calling me from the East Coast to see if I was alive and, come home, don't stay out there. And I'm like, it's just an earthquake. But you know.
Every place has something.
Yeah. I'm up in Seattle now and we have almost a complete lack of sunlight.
Hey, I was a kid and I watched Wizard of Oz and I was afraid to go to Kansas for a really long time because I thought, the tornado is going to get me. So yes, if you don't live there, it seems a lot scarier.
Yeah. Yeah. But uh, the thing that makes me the most sad about talking about the Ur-Quan Masters is I have a degenerative color blindness. It runs in my family. So when you have full color vision as a child, and then when you hit adulthood, you start to lose it. So I started losing mine at 22. Those when you go to look at the numbers at the doctor in the bubbles, there's 47, there's 40 some of those, 47, I think. I missed one when I was 22. The last time I took the test, I missed 23 or 24. So
Yes.
I've lost a huge
Regressing.
chunk. Oh, a huge chunk of
Yeah.
everything looks like pastel watercolors to me.
Uh,
I recently replayed Ur-Quan Masters and I was playing and I'm like, wasn't it a lot more colorful than this?
Oh,
And then I realized it is just as colorful, but the game looks like a watercolor version of what I remember. And I'm like, that's too bad.
well, it's sort of like some people have rose tinted glasses for nostalgia. You have your own unique, tint for
My,
nostalgia.
my special, yes.
Well, go ahead. Good.
Well, I was hoping there wasn't anything color based in it because I'm like, I seem to have no trouble playing it, but I've had trouble playing other games, especially older games that don't have accessibility options. But I didn't have any trouble playing that.
There's some color in like the star colors and planet colors, but you don't need to pick up on it. You can play
Yeah.
without it. It's not required that you understand, oh, this star is green, this star is blue, this star is white.
I don't think there was an important information being conveyed with that, but like
there was subtle information. It affected the types of planets you would find surrounding them.
did you follow actual astronomical information to make
We started down that road, and most everything was eventually procedurally generated. Most things, other than like the ships and the planet Earth itself had an Earth texture on it. But we started down that road, and it became something that was a lot of work and didn't really express itself very well in what you were experiencing. And so we decided we kept some of that work for the procedural generation, but we felt it was much more useful to have the planets be kind of characters themselves with descriptive names like treasure worlds and ruby worlds, rather than a rocky world. Have some descriptive names so that it would tickle the imagination a little bit.
I think it's interesting that here we are 3 decades later, and there's still games coming out that are fighting with that push and pull of procedural, handmade, procedural for big universe games. It still hasn't been solved. But
yeah, and also even reality versus fantasy, like realism in games. That's, gosh, I've been hearing that drumbeat for 20 years or something,
Yeah.
make the game more realistic. And actually, that might not make it better. You want a little bit of abstraction.
Play games to escape from realism.
Yeah, exactly. I got enough reality. But like for you, Fred, you were saying, I think you'd said to someone else, like it was a matter of necessity to procedurally generate it. Like there's no way you could make all of that universe.
Yeah.
You were a small team, right?
I was the only programmer, and Paul was the designer, but we farmed out writing, and other people designed some ships and stuff. But yeah, so I had to do what I could to not be sucked in completely by a giant open world.
What was your design process? Did you have documentation or whiteboards or note paper?
Well, we had the first game, which pretty much gave us the foundation of combat. So that was pretty much a solved thing. For the second game, obviously we made more ships, which had new and different powers, but the foundation was pretty much the same. And so then we just started making things, kind of a piece at a time. So we would concentrate on, okay, here's interplanetary. What do we want to happen here? We have these different colors and sizes of stars, and what does that mean? And how can we represent planets? Because we weren't a 3D game, obviously. So creating those kind of elliptical views with of the planets, and then how do we generate the planet? Each planet when you get to it. So it's very kind of step by step getting to each piece, and then the pieces would get mature enough so that we could hook them to other pieces, and then yeah, just kind of polish from there. And the writing came in super late. We had a plot done much earlier, and you would it's kind of funny too. You'd run into an alien in like hyperspace, and he would just say, "Arilu, hello, one." That was all he would say, and you would have some responses to that, and then he would say, "Arilu, goodbye, three," when you left him, and we sent a version to Accolade kind of probably 3 or 4 months before we were done with it. And they said, okay, we're ready to ship this. You've got all the dialogue in, and it was no, that's just placeholder. We're actually going to have writers say something there instead of just Arilu hello one. So that was, they didn't understand what we were making. They were mostly a sports game company at that point.
So did you write the whole story first and
Uh,
then come up with like what I always wondered was the Chenjutsu and the murmur already existed, but then in Ur-Quan Masters they combined in the Chenjutsu
Shimmer.
Chimur,
Yeah.
and they had a cool new ship. Did the ship come first, or did the story happen and then you had to make a ship?
The ships, that was not a very connected process. This pretty much I would make the ships. I would say, okay, what powers haven't we done yet? What would be fun to play? And then I would sort of make the ship engineering wise, so you could fly it around, and it would have like artwork from an old ship, because we hadn't done the new ship. And so we just made ships that were fun to fly and fight with. And we didn't really say, okay, these are a race of aliens that do this and that and the other thing, so their ship should look like this. It was not that at all. It was just kind of assigning them later,
I mean,
which
they were
was,
so wildly different that it felt like a really good rock, paper, scissors thing where there was no one ship that could take out all the other ships.
yeah, it definitely was not supposed to be a classic fighting game where any fighter can beat any other fighter if you just know the moves. And it was definitely supposed to be rock, paper, scissors. And the way we tried to balance that was through the cost of the ship. Um, so if you tried to assemble a 200-point team, uh, you wouldn't be able to buy as many Ur-Quan as you could show Fixty if you wanted to. But there were still matchups that were, like you said, rock, paper, scissors, where the ship sucks against most ships, but against this one ship, it just takes it out.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is I thought it was really well done when you learned about the aliens' psychology, that the ship often matched that. So again, I wondered, did you make a ship and then say what kind of alien would fly this? Or did you already have the alien race and what kind of ship would they make? Like
Well,
the
I think,
Bathy rear firing, because they were
yeah,
cowards and they would
yeah,
run
yeah.
away and shoot while they
Um,
were doing it.
yeah, I think the powers would kind of reflect, but it's the powers would kind of be reflected, but the ship itself didn't necessarily have to be a jack, you know.
Ah,
Uh, so yeah, and like the Threadash afterburners seemed kind of appropriate to them. Uh, but there wasn't a strong connection between the ships and the aliens, and same with the music. The music, because the music all came in from a music contest. We just said submit some music themes.
wow.
And we got in trouble for that because there pretty much was a non-existent internet at the time, and we needed to get the word out. And so we put it out on the well and like these places that are supposed to be scientific uh, websites,
Oh,
and they didn't appreciate that very much. But we had one $500 first prize, and then the rest were just $50 for using the music. And so
wow.
we got a lot of submissions, and we didn't give any direction, and they would come in and we'd listen to it and we'd say, oh, let's give this to the Melnorme, and you know, this one's kind of heavy metal and
I
pounding the
still
guitar.
I
Yeah,
still
go
hum the Outwig music, that dirge they
ahead.
have. I just every now and then I just find myself humming it, and I'm like, it's been 31 years, and I just start going bum 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 out of nowhere.
Do you wear
It's
masks too?
Yeah.
to show my utter despair or whatever. There,
Yeah.
no, the
Okay.
utmost. Yeah, yeah, that was hilarious. An entire race that was depressed. I
Yeah.
mean, and then when they were happy, they were still just they were like depressedly happy.
Yeah.
But
That
that's
did
what I love. They were alien. They were
well, you know, they were alien, but the way they were alien was we kind of took a human characteristic or trait and just went to the extreme on it. But each alien was very much into what they believed. They didn't try to be funny, but they were funny because of their extremes.
in around right before I played Ur-Quan Masters. I co-wrote a screenplay for Star Trek Next Generation with someone who was in grad school with me, and they almost went with it. And when I played Ur-Quan Masters, it made me think of that because what we did, me and the co-writer, we decided that the aliens were just one human trait pushed to an extreme, which is very much what made me think for Ur-Quan Masters. But in this particular case, it was a race that was hilariously funny. So funny that they couldn't interact with other races. They thought other races were too dry and humorless and boring. So they sent the most boring, down to earth scientists they could find on their planet to talk to the Federation. And it was Robin Williams in pure, just crazy Robin Williams mode. And he was the least funny person on their planet. In fact, they said you can't beam down. Maybe Data could, but they find that some races die in their presence.
The
And
funniest joke.
it was just I love that. And then I think it was a year later. It's probably 91 when we did that, maybe 90. So within a year or two, I played Ur-Quan Masters, and I was like, oh, these alien races are extreme human traits, and they also think in an odd way. And I just really love that because I felt alien and not. They didn't feel like human beings with
Yeah.
funny foreheads. So just the little icons of how they control their ship. Like the Spathi would hide and you just see like something come up and move a lever and then go back down. That was hilarious. So that was so what you did. Was it 320-200 or was it 644?
320-200, yeah.
What you pulled off with that many pixels. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the captain's windows is what we call them is did a lot to give the ship's character.
So much flavor.
Yeah, and it was, you know, it's funny. I would sometimes we did a lot of like live development streams, and people in like our community are used to me calling like Super Melee is like a fighting game, and the stories of characters are like fighting game stories, you know. So if you go play Mortal Kombat or whatever, like, yeah, I'm sure there's some deep lore if you untangle it, but the point is you just get enough of like seeing who they might be that you can kind of get the imagination pistons firing. And I think it's interesting, like talking about how it's a role-playing game that, you know, ships are characters, and they express themselves differently in their interactions with the world, in their little captain's windows, in just the name of the ship. I mean, yes, Siren Penetrator, we can make lots of jokes about that. But
A different time.
hey, we
The
can
Wild
still make
West, yeah.
those jokes. We can still make those jokes. We might just twist them a little differently.
Well, to me too, the greatest thing about the story was there was something hiding in plain sight while you're playing it the whole time. Every time you talk to an Ur-Quan, and there was the little translator in the bottom. And then when you find out the secret, can I give spoilers? It's been 31 years.
Everything
I hope
old
so.
is new again.
They're actually running the show, the translators.
Yeah, that's right.
They've enslaved the Ur-Quan Masters. And I remember, I mean, I wouldn't say that was worthy of M. Night Shyamalan because you predated him, but what a twist. So I wanted to tell everybody, hey, you got to play this game because there's this great twist, but I didn't want to tell them what it was. But that was the fact that you see that right at the beginning. It's just right there. It was brilliant. It was brilliant.
Oh, thanks.
John's
I think I made several people on the Fallout team play.
That's what I was going to ask, is when you were trying to, like, I mean, I'm glad you glowing appreciation, but like, how did you convince other people? Did you actually show it to them? Did you reference it? Like, how was it part of your own development, like in your own efforts? Because, you know, you said, oh, it was such a huge part of what, like, I want to go do this. How did that like manifest itself for you?
Well, it's funny, and people always are shocked that first Fallout was B tier. But what I did is I was so like, I'd come from grad school back into the game industry, and I just wanted to do stuff. And it was like, it moved at too slow of a pace. So I just started making engines. I made a 3D engine, I made a voxel engine, I made a sprite engine, and all of them were horrible except the sprite engine. So I tried to get artists to look at it and say, what game would we make? And then they're like, well, what game do you like? And so I'd start giving them things like, I think I gave them Ultima 3, Ur-Quan Masters, I'm trying to remember the other ones, and all of them had a similar thing. They were all role-playing games. They all had what I considered to be pretty good writing and a pretty good storyline that you followed. Because I love that Ultima 3 ended. Oh my goodness, it's a computer. And I wanted that at the end. I wanted the villain to be not what you expected, which is why people were always surprised that the master at the end of Fallout is, you expect just a bigger mutant or a smart mutant like the lieutenant, and it's not. It's this blobby thing with more than one head and a computer part. It was just weird, and I was like, this is perfect. And I think because of the way the game started was just meet me in the evening in a conference room. I'll have a pizza and we're going to talk about things like these games that were out. It was such a huge influence on me that I'd keep talking. I'm like, well, I want good story and I want good music and I want this. And the games I picked to talk to all had examples of that. And it helped Fallout kind of quickly gel in people's heads that all the different things should be thematic and they should all be related, but it should be fun. Getting that balance of humor and darkness, that's hard to pull off. And you guys pulled it off. I mean, when you find some of the things that have happened, it's dark, but most people think of the game as silly, but it's both. And that's what I wanted in Fallout. I said, it's got to be dark, but it's got to be funny. And people are like, but it's the apocalypse. I'm like, bear with me. We'll get to the humor. And I found the right people, and showing them games like this helped filter out people who didn't get it. So in many ways, it was far more influential than I think people realize.
Yeah, so it provided, like, there was like structural elements, but even like, I mean, dialogue trees. Like, I want my game to have dialogue trees, and also just what you're saying, like humor. I mean, and maybe even just working at Toys for Bob for a long time, I still remember talking to people about making things funny. And, it's like that is almost something that you can't convince someone of. You just have to try it and show. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to convince them that, one, it's hard, but two, trust me, this, like, yeah, as you said, a dark thing, it's going to be even funnier because it is dark, or,
The
whatever
tough thing
twist.
for us was everybody thinks I can write, which I quickly learned I cannot, and everybody thinks they're funny. Everybody thinks they're funny. It's really hard to explain to someone that they're not funny. And
Now that's funny.
Yeah, that is.
so it helped to point out things, like to be able to point to Ur-Quan Masters and go, see how that's dark, that storyline, what happened to that race? But look at how these races talk about it. And we have to do something like that. And the people who got it, and they'd write things, I'm like, yes, more of this and less of this. Finally, it went in a direction that I'm like, that's exactly what I want. But it was hard to get there originally, and it helped that other games had done it. It's interesting that I didn't see a lot of people playing the game for that reason. They all talked about how fun ship combat was and exploration and stuff like that. But I'm like, there's a lot going on here to learn from. And like, I wanted procedural generation, but we just didn't have the time to do that. I wanted stuff when you were crossing the world map, when you had an encounter, it procedurally generated it. Instead, we ended up, having a bank of maps to drop into, and then we populate it. But the sky was the limit back then, and it was
Because we
very
didn't
useful.
know any better. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, there were no recipes. So to be able to even point to a game and go, like, this helped so much. And that really screened the people who were going to be on Fallout, because they got it.
When you were, like, say, screening people, were there, like, I don't want to, maybe this is the wrong word, but I'll just call it coaching. Were you trying to, like, take people who are like, I'm a writer, I've never written for a game before, or vice versa, I've never written anything before. Like, what was that discovery process like of finding the right fit for people?
What's interesting is, and I proved it in Temple of Elemental Evil, that I'm not a good writer. People hate the writing in that game, and I'm like, that's me. But everybody liked playing D&D and GURPS and other tabletops when I GM'd. It's part of the reason I started doing the YouTube channel, because people say I tell stories better than I write them. So I'm like, well, I'm going to stop writing. And so what I did was we would play tabletop games, and I would have adventures that kind of I wish we could do this in a computer RPG. And one of the things I would tell people, I made a 6-room dungeon, and I ran 3 groups through of different people, 3 different nights, wildly different characters, and they played differently. And the guy who became my lead artist and did a lot of design as well, Leonard Boreski, he played the first session, and then he came the next 2 nights and watched me play other people through. And he was surprised it was the same dungeon, because they went through the rooms in different orders. Sometimes they skipped a room, they handled things differently. And I pointed to my design, and I said, it's all the same thing. And he said, well, why is it playing so differently? And I said, because they're bringing different characters with different skills, and they're doing different things. And then the game reacts. And that's what I wanted. And, the fact that there are very few games that let you go anywhere you wanted right when you started, that was the first time you leave the solar system and you in hyperspace in Ur-Quan, and you just go anywhere you want. It's like, and you're like, well, where should I go? It's like, go anywhere you want. I wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, well, we very intentionally wanted you to feel just overwhelmed by the immensity of your task at the beginning.
And space is big, and
space is big, and you're slow, and everything is hard. But we wanted at the end of the game for you to have conquered all of that, and not only feel powerful in who you are at that moment, but also appreciate the journey you went through to get there.
that's the essence, I think, of a good role-playing game too. I mean, no one played it quite the same. No one ended up with quite the same ship. Some people didn't do some of the things. There were a lot of optional things to do.
Yeah.
And I loved that. And I used to talk about, like, there was so much stuff we wanted in Fallout that never made it in. I wish we had more of that. I wish we had more optional areas. I wish we had more procedurally generated stuff. I actually was working on procedurally generated dialogue, which I guess is a bigger thing now. Just because our narrative designers couldn't keep up with our requests. Did you write all the dialogue in-house? You said you
we had about, well, that was all friends, so I'm not sure what you mean by in-house. Paul and I were the only two people kind of on the payroll, but we did pay people for some things, artwork mostly, and the music, although not very much. But mostly we had friends who, Paul did some of the writing, and then Greg Johnson, the brilliant designer of Starflight and Starflight 2 and Toe Jam and Earl and a bunch of other things. He did some writing for us. A guy named Matt Genzer. Yeah.
How did you explain the humor to all those different writers?
Well, they were all friends, and so they had similar tastes to us. And most of them, I don't know whether you've ever read Jack Vance or not, but you really, yeah. We're all big Jack Vance.
He's back here on the shelves.
Yeah, Jack Vance fans, and he's a master of taking aliens or people on different planets anyway, with extreme societies that seem bonkers but are perfectly consistent to them. And so everybody was kind of familiar with that as a touchstone. And so we would tell them these are the plot elements they know, and they have to be exposed / given to the player at certain points in conversations. And other than that, just go wild.
We had trouble finding our tone at first. I don't think Jack Vance was something I pointed people at, but I used to think Jack Vance was expanding my vocabulary, but some of those words aren't real.
I know some of them aren't. You're right.
So I think he messed up my vocabulary when I read it as a teenager.
But I really like the way he makes up words that you know what he means by them.
They sound like they could be real words. They're evocative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you find out, like, just like Jabberwocky, they're totally made up.
Yeah, but he does it in a way where you get his meaning, and he doesn't over describe things. And that we found that to be very important for a number of reasons, because if you tell everybody how the video screen you're looking through is made and all that stuff, then it gets obsolete very quickly as our own technology passes by. But if you just sort of offhanded say, hey, there's a video screen here, just deal with it. Imagine it's made however you want, and that will stand the test of time. And then go ahead.
Well, we found that because of things like that, it was hard to translate it into other languages. Did you have trouble translating this game?
We never translated it.
It didn't come out in other countries?
We made a Japanese version of it, but they really hated the Utwig because they're complainers.
Oh.
Yeah.
But that was an adorable thing about them.
Well, that's just not part of their culture. And but other than that, I mean, I think Ur-Quan Masters has had language packs made for it, but by fans, basically.
Because humor is very hard to translate, and because you don't know the language, you don't know if the game's got the same tone.
Yeah.
And I've been told by a lot of fans that they learned English because the Fallout in their home language, their native language, wasn't very good. So they got the English one, and they just learned English so they could play it that way. I wonder how many people learned English to play
I've heard that about Ur-Quan Masters, that
it.
some people learned, or at least improved their English.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem still exists, which is if you have some of your work translated, how do you know the jokes are as funny, and how do you know it crossed the boundaries? You know, it's I don't think that problem will ever go away, but
The problem we've always had too was I love writing dumb dialogue for characters that don't have high intelligence. And almost every localization group we've used, the translators have had issues in translating dumb dialogue because it usually is written incorrectly, almost Jack Vancian way of made up words or words that aren't right to make the speaker sound stupid. And then they have to understand what's being said and then figure out how to say the same stupid thing in their language. And it's really hard. So we got a lot of pushback about dumb lines. But I can't even imagine translating the Ors. I don't even understand half of what they say. So do you just literally translate happy camper into French?
Yeah, I don't know how they would do that.
yeah, I don't know, but I would hope to like in the fantasy version for say our for our new game where we do actually want to really translate things in house and get that going. I think it's exactly what you described, which is you need to get someone in the room who understands what you're trying to do, and let them go with it. I had actually an ex, and she took a whole course. She has masters in writing, and she wrote, and she took a whole course in translating and doing that as like potentially some work. And you're pretty much writing a new book at that point. And you're, whose voice is it anymore? Well, this thing doesn't really make sense. I kind of need to reword this. It's too clumsy if you do this. The culture you're writing for won't even understand what you're trying to do. Like make a character dumb by having them sound dumb. Does that even work in every culture? I don't even know.
Yeah.
You might have other ways to communicate that. And, don't even get me started with things like animation. I haven't heard anybody talk about that, but like translating a gesture for frustration into different languages, because that doesn't necessarily cross all boundaries too.
We had problems because German tends to make their things longer.
Yes.
We had trouble with the 640 480 screen. I can't imagine 320 by 200 because every German word gets longer than the screen can hold.
Yeah.
That's why we should do it all of our games in Esperanto now, just to like make it universally unintelligible, and then everybody has to learn the language to play the game so they're all on the same footing.
Or just do the Sims route where they just talk in an unintelligible blah, 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 and then a little bubble comes up and that shows like a hamburger. You're like, oh, it's hungry.
Yeah, let's tell a very deep Jack Vancian story with nothing but emojis. Let's see how that works out. Anybody up for it? No one's interested? I don't know why. Well, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned like running tabletop games too, because I mean, Paul's huge tabletop person, and Errol did writing too, right, Fred?
Well, he's the one who started the Ors, but he wasn't able to finish it. So
Oh, I see. Well, yeah. So there's sort of like the legacy of D&D going back and trying to translate those sorts of experiences, and even what you said, like Tim, about oh well, the different players play it differently, but that's the point. Is I want different people to have different experiences, like especially when. I mean, role-playing game. I don't know. Was anybody calling a game a role-playing game like a long, long time ago? Now it's a whole genre and there's so many games. But did you ever have to describe that to someone and say that's the point?
In the 80s, no, nobody was calling them. A computer game was its own thing. By the early to mid 90s, I remember role-playing games and adventure games were both starting to diverge. But everybody would always have to ask, well, what's the difference between a role-playing game? And I was told if it has hit points, it's a role-playing game. If it doesn't, it's an adventure game. I'm like, okay, that sounds arbitrary, but that's my new rule. But yeah, it was interesting to watch the genres even emerge then. And we're still getting more. I mean, everyone's talking about MSims now, and I'm like, okay, immersive simulation is good, but that's just a sort of sub. It's a sort of a trait of a game. I can see MSim RPGs, I can see MSim combat simulators, and
Yeah.
it's. I'm not sure what they're getting out of that, but it's. I like seeing people getting excited about it. So anything that makes people get excited about games is great. It's
Yeah.
kind of why I'm trying to get the next generation to make games a certain way so I can play their games.
Oh, that's really meta. So wait. So we came from you played a game and said, I want to play a game like this, and going on to make it yourself. And now is this like part of why you started your YouTube channel? Like, let's flip it around and say, I want to like, I don't want to say spoon feed, but I want to like put people on the conveyor belt to do this
Oh,
themselves.
it was deliberate. I mean, somebody said, why do you only do little 10-minute videos? And I'm like, because I want people to watch them in their coffee break. I want it to be one topic. I don't want to be like, here's how you make an RPG. Sit down for 150 hours while I go through everything. It's just, hey, let's talk about attributes. Let's talk about skills. Let's talk about classes versus skills. And then I think I made about 100 of those videos before I said, I have an ulterior motive. Some people watching this are going to go into game development, and you're going to make games like I've described, games I like to play. And then I will be fully retired and I will be playing your games. And my secret plan will come to fruition.
Oh my gosh, that's like a meta narrative. It's like you've turned yourself into the video game plot twist, and now you're writing outside of yourself. I mean, that's
all,
pretty, that's
all I know
deep,
is
man.
some of the comments I get are people are like, I've decided to make a game, or I had a game I put aside for the last 6 months. I've picked it back up and I'm gonna finish it. And I'm like, yes, because then it'll go on Steam or GOG or Epic or wherever games are sold these days, and I'll get to play it. And to me, that's if that means I have to sit and talk for 10 minutes every day, it's obviously not a problem for me to talk. I love it that there's this whole generation. They're like, how do you make a quest? What's a good way of telling a nonlinear story? How do you do loot generation? And I'm like, I can talk about that. Most of my videos now are me responding to questions. It's really taken off, and people have asked a lot of really good questions. So there's a whole new, just eager group out there, and there are free game engines. I mean, can you imagine if having Unity or Unreal back in the 90s?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
all the
I would have
wheels
dropped
we
out
had to
of high school.
reinvent. Yeah. Just, I don't know if I had to write one more blitter or,
Exactly.
write a font manually up on the screen. I'm just with kerning, and I'm like, not monospaced. I forget what it's called. It's that I've done that 50,000 times. I just can't do that again. But
It's
even
funny
STL
because
was amazing. Sorry.
oh no, don't apologize. No, we're here for you. No, but like seriously, there's well, bringing up the rose tinted glasses again. There's a whole like retro games that we could call. There are like retro games, and even like I mean, as we record this video, Sea of Stars has been receiving a lot of accolades, and they're super intentionally retro. And I talked with Fred about this a long time ago. But retro, I sort of feel like I have mixed feelings about that, especially knowing like hearing people talk and having worked on games for a while. Like I don't want to do it the way I have to do it before. Let's never do that again. But are there aspects of like either take that word retro, or as you're saying, like, oh, I never want to have to do it again. Are there things for you which aren't like, oh, this used to be so great, I wish I could do this? Are there things where you're like, no, really, I actually liked the way I was doing this 10, 20, however long years ago, for you?
The only thing that worries me is because a lot of the engines come with standard ways of doing things. I'm worried that sometimes people won't, if they had an idea and it doesn't fit in the box that's already provided, they'll change their idea to fit the box rather than change the box. And that's the only thing that worries me. I've always tell people, come up with your ideas first and try to instantiate them as well as you can. Don't just because this game supports dialogue trees a certain way. Oh well, I guess that's how I'm going to do dialogue trees. So I mean, we're well past where you have to handcraft everything for your game, but you can get a game going so quickly that you have time to handcraft some parts, the important parts.
Yeah.
So I try to
High
encourage
five,
that.
Fred. Sorry, that's very valid. I'm the enthusiastic talker here, but I want Fred to talk to, but and you, Philly. But like we wrote a whole blog post just about that, and having worked on seriously like working on engines, I wrote a whole piece about how, you know, I want art. I don't want to give someone a charcoal pencil and say make black and white art. That's all art is, black and white. And so like I'll just echo back what you said. You know, I I'm much younger, but I did get started in modding, and you know, modding Marathon was probably my first game developing experience aside from ROM hacks of old AOL games that I would do, and like, or asset hacks. I had no idea what I was doing, but computers and buttons were my favorite thing as a kid. But now, you know, like a joke I would often tell people is I can tell that somebody made a game in Unreal in the 5 seconds of looking at it because
Yeah.
they used the thing out of the box. And, you know, like I DJ too, and people had the same complaints about DJs using laptops, which is, oh, you know, I play records. It's like, oh, but if you're not spinning the record and you're letting the computer make all the decisions for you, then are you even making anything anymore? But I've seen with especially music, I mean, using music as an example, it's people's creativity is still there. We're just lowering the bar and lowering the bar more and more. You know, I don't want someone to use the out of the box camera from every game engine unless they do because they care about some other part. And it's nice that they have the stepping stone. But I think Fred actually said this. There's no one size fits all. And it's a little, I don't want to say I mean, I can be pretty morose sometimes, but I don't want to say disconcerting, but I think it's wrong to say there's one engine for every game or there is one solution for every problem. And like some of, I don't know if you want to get into our tech, Fred, but you know, some of the intent of how we do things, and even at Toys for Bob with the tools we had was nothing's defined. You figure it out, you know, and having that is kind of scary if you've never done it before. Like I need something to grab onto, like you're talking about being in the room and showing them a game and say, I want it to be like this is so useful when you're trying to get people onboarded. But at the same time, if you know where you're going, then are you really creating something, or are you, you know, like there's a little like push and pull there.
It's funny. I started at Obsidian in 2011 to work on the South Park game. Um, the one game in my entire career I would never let my mother see. And they used to come to me and go, and because I was brand new. They'd already been working on it for over a year, maybe even a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. And they'd come to me and go, hey, can the engine do this? Like a designer would come. And I didn't know. So before I do anything, I'd look at them and go, well, what do you want to do? Because if the engine doesn't do this, I can just make the engine do it. That's why I'm here. And some of them were like, well, I just figured if the engine did a certain thing, I would design for what the engine's doing. And I'm like, what do you want to do? And many of them hadn't been asked that. What do you want to do? They've been saying, because they were using a modified Dungeon Siege engine, which is crazy if you look at Dungeon Siege.
Wow, Dungeon Siege. I haven't thought of that in a
3,
long time. Wow.
Yeah. There's very little visually similar between Dungeon Siege 3 and South Park. The stick of truth. But they are built on the same code. And yeah.
So you ask them that so that when they finally tell you what they want to do, then you can come down with the hammer and say, no, we can't do that.
that was the joke. The programmer I replaced, because he was moving to another project, used to just immediately say no. Hey, can we do this? And he'd go, no. So then they suddenly had me go, can we do this? Well, what do you want to do? What are you trying to do? And then they look at me and I'm like, let's find out. And I'd open the code and I'm like, you can't do it, but give me an hour and I think you can do it. And I remember this one designer was like, really? Are you allowed to do that? I'm like, I was told to support you. I'm your programmer. I will go be a programmer and then come back and then you have to be the designer. And I think it was just a different way. They looked at, because I mentioned STL earlier. I worked with a programmer who his first thing would be, is it in the standard template library? Can I just, what you want, can I just grab something out of there, a list, an array, a vector, and just have it done? And I would instead look at the design and go, what are you trying to do? Because there was a problem once where they they were always adding one thing at the end of a list and then resorting it. Well, the standard template library used quicksort, and quicksort is the worst algorithm to use on an almost already sorted list. It's its worst case. And then I found out they were resorting it to find the smallest element. And I'm like, but you could find the smallest element in O of n, and instead you're sorting it, and it's not even n log n, it's like n squared, and then you're grabbing the smallest one. And then you do it again after something else gets added to the end. And I'm like, you're making me crazy what they're doing. And I just rewrote that, and they didn't know it was rewritten. It just suddenly it worked a different way now, or it worked the same from their view of how that worked, but underneath it was very different. And that's just how I thought. I thought, build something for what you want. Don't. It's the phrase, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to have a lot of things in my toolbox.
Yeah, I mean the scenario you just described is, I'm so sorry, Fred, I'm speaking for you again, but that's
okay.
what kind of, well, you know, that's even how Fred, I learned a lot, you know, I worked with Fred for many years when I was very young and probably should have been in college, but oh well, I got a job in game development instead. But you know, the idea is if a designer does something and proves that it's fun and works, that's more important than make it go fast. Make it go fast you can do later. And, you know, I mean, of course, with engineering, there's always the optimize too early thing and whatever, but this is a game. If it's not fun, who cares about, you can polish whatever, optimize whatever, like find the fun part. And, you know, I'd sort of say like the best thing and the best thing to do and the hardest thing to talk about in some ways, although it sounds so like trite and simple, is optimize for finding the fun. That is the most difficult part of a game. Otherwise, people make lots of games. I mean, people do make lots of games, but like otherwise everybody could just wake up and make a great game. It's, well, find the fun first and then worry about how it's going to get done, you know. But if you have fun and can prove it's fun, especially without, no offense to engineers, and I'm talking to two right now, but especially without having to say, hey, engineer, I'm going to sell you on what I'm trying to do so that I can waste a week of your time to do what I think might be fun, but I don't know if it's fun. That's been like a huge factor of how like I work with Fred and how like we worked at Toys for Bob and how we're working now, you know, like talk about, we're kind of I want to say religious about it, cult-like about believing in that designers probably are the best deciders of what is and isn't fun, and not necessarily an engine or something like that.
I agree.
But it's hard to tell people about that, especially when you're presented with something like an engine that wants to solve everything for you and tries to solve everything for you, you know, as a template.
And it's so tempting because you can prototype so quickly in like Unity. I can have an idea and just have it up quickly. But if any of my idea doesn't fit into the Unity way of doing things, you just have to give up. It reminds me of I like Windows more than Mac. That's just me. But I use an iPhone. But if I don't want to do something on an iPhone, I used to use a Android. On an Android, you could just change it. I don't like the UI being this way. I'll make it something different. With the iPhone, I better like what it does because
you're not getting anything different.
Yeah. It's done that way. That's just how it is on the iPhone. And I'm like, okay. I mean, it does what it does really well, but you better not want it to do something different. And that's kind of how I feel about the new game engines. They do what they do really well. If you want to do something different, you're going to have to work. And
yeah, especially when they give, I would say, more valence to certain things. Like, let's just, I mean, my favorite one to pick on is like graphics, like make the graphics amazing. And okay, but what if I don't really need that or want that at this point? It's like, don't worry, we've optimized this pipeline to make sure your game is going to look great at the end, but I'm just trying to see if it's fun. No. Think about the graphics or whatever, you know? And so everybody's got the cool part is there are at least multiple engines and different people have different ideas about it. And like, I won't talk too much about what we're doing, you know, but it's not an engine, but it is an idea. And even like Fred, you would probably agree and say, well, there are things that it does really well. There's probably things you wouldn't want to do in it, but that's good and okay. Like it doesn't have to be one size fits all.
Yeah, I would say that.
I would
what
know
have
it
you
because I've
announced?
heard you say it. Sorry.
What have you announced about what you're doing?
Well,
Announced.
everybody kind of knows what we're doing, and we have a community, a Discord community, and Patreon community, and um, so we're not shy about what we're making. We haven't really been giving any spoilery details of like the story. Um, and we've also been doing dev streams, not recently because we've started getting into more and more spoilery stuff. But we were doing dev streams with this interesting technology that I've had in my head for a number of years and have finally managed to get it out of my head. Um, and so people have been watching us build pieces of the game and with that technology. It's not it's not an engine per se. Uh, it's kind of so you know like Unity, C Sharp, and Unreal blueprints. It's kind of a step below that. So it's a simulation kernel that allows you to make multiplayer games out of the box without thinking about it. Um, and you can still do your C sharp scripting in Unity and your blueprints in Unreal and whatever, but this sort of irreducible kernel of gameplay is meant to be portable across all platforms, all game engines, all whatever. And you and the designer can write multiplayer games transparently, basically.
When does this release?
We could demo it for you.
It's out. We've released it to our community. People have made stuff with it. You can have it. Yeah. I seriously would be happy to give you a demo sometime. I mean, right now would be a very impromptu demo, but but yeah, totally. All of Freestar's Children of Infinity is written in it, but our community has made pinball games. I was joking about Moused earlier. That is really the name of someone's project that they were doing fun. Someone did like an Arkanoid style clone. I did some weird prototypes in it, but a long time ago. I don't even remember what they were. But yeah, it's very it kind of does whatever you want. And the crucial aspect that I love too is it's multiplayer enabled, and I never think about writing, oh, is this network safe? Because it's not my job.
The kernel has been designed to be network safe. So the only way the designer can interface with it is safely.
And it's
Nice.
meant to be given to a designer, which is, of course, for me, a designer who had to be enough of an engineer to just get stuff done. That's the dream. So when the conversation we were describing earlier, where you say, hey, go convince an engineer, like, or talk about what can it do. No, I don't want to talk to anybody because my idea might be really dumb. And it usually is. It usually is 90% of the time. So let me prove that it's good or dumb before I convince anybody of it, much less show them it. So being able to like work and prototype on your own really, really fast, to your point about like, yeah, you can get something up and running really quick. And what we have, there's no graphics, like if I wanted to put art on the thing I made, that's beyond the scope of what Fred's been building. But that's okay. If I can make it fun with spheres and bricks, then cool. I can be even better with graphics.
Yeah, so it's a 3D kind of physics simulation um, that the designer programs in this cross-platform uh, scripting language that would sit underneath something in Unity or blueprints. And right now we have it up in Godot. And so um, when he says it doesn't have any graphics, we provide a viewer with the sort of IDE that you program in, and the viewer displays just collision shapes. But
Primitives.
yeah, collision primitives. But we've written fancier viewers in like Godot, which is what we're using now. And with that, you can skin those primitives however you want.
See, this is what I'm talking about. I'm getting excited about the games I'll be able to play because I want to retire for full, like for realsies, I haven't managed to do that yet. And then play games, because I didn't get to do that a lot. There's some good games that came out that I didn't get to play as much as I
You're
wanted
here.
because
Yeah.
too busy making games. But yeah, this is I try to tell people I think this is the golden age of gaming. There's so many games out there. The problem is discovery, not existence. And if you don't like a game, there's a billion other games. So I don't understand people rag on a particular game all the time. I'm like, in the time you spent complaining about that game, I've played 3 more games. So that sounds great, especially unleashing the designers to do what they want. That because I've known some designers with some crazy ideas.
They're the ones
And
you have to watch out for. I mean, they're the good ones. I mean, I don't know. Depends on your project.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah.
pretty much having serverless multiplayer just out of the box. So you
Yeah.
don't have to write a server. You just arbitrary drop in. Yeah.
Yeah, and we tested it live on Twitch actually with, I think we got 8 people playing Super Melee all together. Just handed it off, no graphics, but enough, you know,
Nice.
primitives to be able to play. And we had all around the world 8 people just randomly dropped into my game. No real infrastructure required, no live service, no nothing.
Nice.
And it was, you know, speaking of testing and seeing if it's fun, the first thing we learned when we dropped more than 2 players into Super Melee is you can't have more than 2 players in Super Melee before it gets crowded.
And somewhat chaotic, probably.
Yeah.
Very chaotic. Yeah. So, you know, that's still in the cards for what we want to try for the game, but, you know, valuable learning experience. The faster we can find it, the better.
Did either of you play with the Atari Lynx, the handheld?
A little bit.
It could handle, for multiplayer, it could handle from 2 to 8 people, and very few games did 8 because they discovered you throw 8 people in some kind of combat game and it just becomes this chaotic.
Yeah.
2 or 3, that's okay. 4 or 5, it's starting to get messy. 6, 7, 8, it's crazy. On anything, like if it's a race car game, okay. Anything less controlled and confined than that, chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of kind of golden age of games, another thing that I think I'm kind of curious what your take is on this feels to me like the golden age of co-op games, because now, I mean, I grew up, I didn't have a PC for a long time when I was growing up. And I remember like, wow, I can plug 4 controllers into my Nintendo 64. This is the craziest thing in the world. But they weren't co-op games. They're always competitive games, fighting games, Super Smash Brothers, those sorts of things. Star Fox, you know, let's shoot at each other, that kind of thing. But the sort of tastes have gone to co-op games a lot more, and it's because it's easier to get some of that going. And I'm just curious, like thinking about games like Fallout, or, you know, we haven't even gotten to like Tyranny, but I'm like, oh, I do kind of want to talk about that. No, it's like, it's a little like, I don't know, I have pet games where I have the sentiment, which is, you know, how come this wasn't a hit? I don't understand it, you know?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I'll just say
Yeah.
that I really love that game. But one thing I think about too, when I think about, say, Ur-Quan Masters, and we're planning for our game, or even Fallout, is what would it be like to play this with more than one person and have storytelling together? Like, how have you approached that problem, or have you wanted to, or you're like, no, that's someone else's game, that's a different game, I don't want to do it, or it's more like I have a DM player relationship with it?
The one time, well, I had a couple games, like Arcanum had multiplayer, but it was really, it's a module, and there was the host was the main character and other people would come in as his sidekicks. The one time we really tried to do that was I worked on an MMO for a while called WildStar, and I had a whole theory of how to tell stories in massively multiplayer situations. I mean, that would have up to 2,000 people could possibly be trying to get involved in a storyline. And there were lots of ways of constraining and controlling that, but it is difficult. It's not now that people want co-op multiplayer, I think that's just like procedural generation. There's stuff out there that does it, but I think the space is really big and it's hardly been explored. I think joint story experiencing is something that. Did you play Little Big Planet? It came out about what, 10 years ago?
PS3?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first
That was
one
co-op.
PS3? Yeah. Yes.
And I think it was for 3 or 4 little yarn people, and that was co-op, and it was super fun. And like little Lost Vikings was a 3-player.
Yep, we played that to death when I was a kid.
Or 2-player, but 3 characters. Yeah, those were early experiments in how to jointly tell stories. I think if multiplayer was easier to make, which sounds like you have now solved that, cracked that nut. People, if you give that tool to people, especially the right people who are being creative about it but couldn't do it because it was so technologically difficult to manipulate.
Yeah,
I think they'll explore that space and we'll find a whole class of games that we've never really seen before or already touched upon in a very primitive way.
Yeah. Well, even you brought up MMO is an interesting one. By the way, just passing on the word for my friends, they loved WildStar. They played that. Right? So just FYI, I think I told someone I'd say this. But I grew up playing MUDs, and you know,
Me too.
MUDs. Oh, really? Okay. Oh, so exciting. Okay.
I was a wizard in an LP MUD in the late 80s.
Okay. I don't think I was playing MUDs until the very early 90s, but I grew up with a Mac, and so my gaming options were somewhat limited, but I had Telnet. and you could do a lot with Telnet. And so I fell into the MUD thing, and long before I even heard of Dungeons and Dragons, I was playing MUDs. And then later I found GURPS, I found MUDs, GURPS, D&D, all of the tabletop stuff, and found a friend group to do that with. But you know, I remember when EverQuest first came out and a lot of my friends got into it. And I had, I was already, in my angsty teenager phase. And I'm like, it's just a MUD with graphics. What's the big deal?
Even had similar MUD commands.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, MMOs are bored of just MUDs with graphics, right? And sure, that was grumpy dad at the time or whatever. But I just think about that and say, like, gosh, the resurgence of Dungeons and Dragons. There's people who love that tabletop experience now. And as you said, like the thing that resonates with me is there is an unexplored area of storytelling. And it's not necessarily that we haven't done it yet. It's that it's been kind of constrained to a niche. Like, yes, if you played MUDs, you would know the joy of like playing through a story with some of your friends, right? And, of course, it's a little more on rails. And yes, the technology still wasn't great. MMOs kind of do that. But even then, like Final Fantasy 14, one of the bigger MMOs still standing, you watch a cutscene by yourself, your friend isn't there. They're not there with you. They have to kind of make stuff up, and they're getting better at it. Don't get me wrong. But the thing I think about is, gosh, the experiences we were having with MUDs, we're still trying to recreate those now with all this graphical overhead. And like you said, the complexity of networking, but also the complexity of interactions that people expect to have in the world. When it was just a text prompt, well, you could build an interaction, right? But now I expect to be able to click things and see it and spin the camera around and all of that. And I go, wow, that's hard.
Well, when I was working on WildStar, I remember Richard Bartle had written a book about MUDs, and one of them included the types of MUD players.
Yep.
And that was a huge influence we created the path system, which is not your class, which is what you can do, but the path is you telling the game, this is what I like to do. So there was fighting, exploring, socializing, and collecting, classifying.
Like achievement oriented.
Yeah. And those four went exactly into the 4 paths. And I remember thinking, EverQuest got a lot of attention and flack for being a little too MUD-like. I hope we don't get too much of this, because these paths are lifted directly from Bartle's ideas and then implemented into a game. But I was like, I've got to do this. I mean, I started in MUDs. I was addicted to EverQuest for several years, and then WoW. And then I was making a MUD, and I'm like, I've got to have something in here like this so that people can tell the game, I just want to fight stuff. I just want to be with my friends. I just want to find things. And then the game can cater to you.
Yep.
So again, that's probably going to be needed in multiplayer. Some way for the player to say, I want to do this. Connect me to people who want to do that.
Yeah. MMOs, I think, are still the best version of that. I think like Divinity Original Sin 2 kind of prove that you can do some of that in a very D&D like way. It comes across that way, which is, you know, there's so many different ways players can play together. And when we worked on Skylanders, there's the thing I loved about that was you could have a competent player playing with someone who wasn't that competent. But for them, it's just about spending time together. Like I'm going to play with my like younger sibling, right? And they can barely hold a controller, but they're here and they're having fun with me. And like, that's the point for some people. Someone
Yeah.
wants Dark Souls or whatever, and that's fine. But for some players, they're just happy to be together. And, you know,
I
it's
played
really
with a
cool to see
friend.
that.
I played with a friend who called EverQuest, "This is just a chat room with orcs."
Yeah, exactly. This is how I socialize with people. My parents would go knock on my door like, "Why are you just staring at walls of text?" And I was like, "Mom, they're not walls of text. These are my friends." It's a true story. They didn't get it. They tried to take my computer away. I got really lonely. It wasn't good. But what I was going to
Wow.
ask about is, you know, one challenge like we're experiencing when we talk about co-op storytelling, and lots of people have talked about co-op storytelling, is there's the story for like in a single player game, there's the story that that player wants to choose and discover by themselves. In co-op, it's almost like now it's a fractal problem or something. It's the story that not just one person wants to experience, but they want to experience together. So what you were saying, there's an article I love that references Bartle's, King's Clubs, Hearts, Spades, whatever that original paper was called. And it talks about how games are about self-actualization. Like they're the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I really like that article because it's like, you're right. And the article says, well, the problem with Call of Duty isn't that it's about shooting people. It's what if you don't want to shoot someone? What about all the other interactions you can have with another creature, like hug or handshake or high five or whatever? And so the game giving you tools to interact with things in the way you want to, for a single player game, okay, that's already challenging, but also we've proven, you know, it can be fun and it's so engaging when you do it with games like Fallout or Ur-Quan Masters. Now, when you have multiple people, how do you know what their idea of fun is? You have to kind of, I mean, I know it's a cheat to say let them have their own fun, but how do you balance like, well, I want to give you enough structure for you to have fun, but I also don't want to tell you exactly what I think fun is. I want you to find out.
Yeah, I think guilds helped with that in a lot of the games because this guild would say we're more towards raiding, we're more towards finishing the main story arc, we're more for crafting, and then you join a guild that fit with what kind of play style you had, but there
Yeah.
was no formal support for that. We had talked about putting some kind of formal support in WildStar because maybe you could get a house and you could have plots on that. You could plant things like I could grow food or I could have an archaeological dig. I mean, I don't know why your house would have an archaeological dig in the backyard, but we did that. And it was because that's what I'm interested in. And then you'd look for guilds that were like, hey, am I looking for people who do these things, or am I looking for people who complement or complementary to me? I'll be the guild archaeologist if you be the guild crafter and you be the guild food producer. And it I saw so many ways that could have gone, but you need a lot of support in the game for people to communicate what they want and then to connect.
Just sounds like its own whole game. But the idea of what you're saying is like let people give them room to self-organize is like resonant, even like we're talking about game writing and like we're working with different writers on this project and saying, well, you don't your story, what you're going to write is only going to be this good. The story that the player tells, this path that they take through it is going to be the best version of the story. And it's not the thing you made, it's the thing they made and experienced in their head. And that's kind of a like uncomfortable thing to try to tell people like, hey, you have to let go and let the player find it out, you know?
Yeah, I always chafe at story driven game. I always say no, it's player driven story. The
Yeah.
player wants to be the person who decides, am I a hero, am I a villain, am I doing good things, bad things, am I neutral? I don't want to get involved in this big conflict. I just want to put animals into pens and feed them hay. That's what I want to do in this game. I like games that have the breadth of, what does Ralph Coster call them, verbs? Give the player enough verbs, and which are actions they can do in the game, and they'll write their own story.
I mean, that's really empowering. And I feel sorry, I haven't been around like a mud player in a while. And I'm just like, no, seriously, I have this like super gushing heart about that, or I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. Even just like the list of commands. I mean, again, you want to talk about rose tinted glasses. I'm just like, I wish I could give a player a list of words, and even just examining the list of commands. Like I can go in Linux and look at the list of commands and it warms the cockles of my heart. You know, there's games and like, what interactions can I have? And now all these GUIs and whatever, but a list of words that let you imagine, like, what does plummet do? What happens when I type in plummet? And the like character of that is something that I feel MUDs, you know, I haven't found a game that recreates literally that experience from a
Yeah.
text adventure or a MUD or something like that. And as we're talking about this, I keep thinking, how could I inspire someone just with words? That's like such an interesting challenge, you know, because now people
Yeah.
expect GUI and mouse driven things.
Well, what's funny is I just remembered my longest running character who started as a player and became a wizard and then made his own areas was named Fred. And Fred made Castle Fred high atop Fred Mountain. I didn't say I was a good writer, but Fred, that was my best character.
Great. It's not a very common name these days, for sure.
No. And I've talked about this to people. Tim is overused because there's the wizard. Some call me Tim.
Yeah.
But Cain in video games, I'm
Oh.
so tired of running into video games with a character named Cain, and they're usually the villain. And I'm just like, okay, everybody needs to stop naming characters Cain. We're done. It's been done.
Inescapable. Oh my gosh, you're right. I never thought about that until you just said that. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. There's a whole series of games. League of Legends has a character named Cain
Yep.
now. Gosh, inescapable.
Varying spellings.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and Resident Evil had a character named Tim Cain. And I'm like, okay, you've gone too far. I'm
You
taking
take
it
that
back. Yeah.
You don't find very many Freds.
Well,
We
there
can
was a
change
Fred.
that.
Wizard Fred was in Castle Fred on Fred Mountain. So
Well,
I went all in on Fred.
just your story has inspired me to share this detail, which I'm pretty sure nobody knows that I've kept secret. But don't worry, when everybody hears this, they can make fun of me. I became a wizard in a MUD, which I will neglect to name. But if anybody knows my online alias, they'll do a good job of doxing me and finding it. And when I was a wizard, I designed an area, and the boss of the area was based off of my high school crush. And I totally named her after her. And I'm so sorry if anybody finds this. I was an angsty teenager. I'm sorry I did this. But yeah, that was my brilliant design idea is designing a character off of my high school crush. And that actually went in the game. And I eventually went back down to becoming a player, but I was named what my current alias is. So
The big villain in Castle Fred was Fred's evil twin, Fred. So there was an
Of course,
NPC that ran around that looked just like me, and it was named Fred, but it was evil and it would attack the player and chase them around and stuff. People would sometimes yell, I thought wizards weren't supposed to attack players because it was kind of come after them with a knife or whatever. And
yeah, that sounds like me.
yeah, I was gonna say you're doing a good Fred.
so you are
impersonation.
the evil Fred.
I have this one hoodie that I wear sometimes when it's really cold, and I look like Emperor Palpatine. So
He embraces the Dark Emperor thing. It's okay, you know.
So what's Paul's role? Is he
Paul,
Luke?
Paul, he designed the whole story again. So we're at that phase where we have to hook up writers to the Arilu Hello ones sort of things. But as you probably have experienced in your life, as time moves on, you have a number of things you want and need to focus on besides development of video games. So he's off being a grandpa right now, and a few other things, but he still was instrumental in getting us to this point.
Nice. Well, be sure to tell him how much the game meant, because it really was a formative game for me.
I will. I still see him every week. So
Nice.
Yeah, we'll pass it on. And I also this is maybe the time delay wasn't good enough for me to finally make a game just for you. You might maybe give it 10 years and I'll be doing one for you, but I have to say, like, Tyranny actually was like very influential to me. I went through a phase with I don't know what to call it, subversive framework games. Lisa the Painful RPG was another one, and I lumped those two together in my head of like, oh my gosh, this game's asking a lot of me emotionally, and it really like struck a chord. You know, if you want to talk about using humor to tell a story, Tyranny kind of for me went the other way, and it's like, let's make you feel the weight of this. So I I can't speak to its market performance, but it influenced me a lot when I was playing through the different games.
Tyranny was interesting to make just because of that. Once we were told the hook, which was, what if Sauron won the War of the Ring? And you're like, what would that world be like? And everybody was like, ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it didn't catch on as much as we wanted it to.
You know, this comes up a lot. This is sort of, I don't know how to say this, but like when we're talking about Ur-Quan Masters, I have encountered many people, including myself, who had never played Ur-Quan Masters. I thought Ur-Quan Masters was super melee. I was that person. And I didn't realize there was a story mode until much, much later. And I would play hours with my friend, and I remembered the rock, paper, scissors kind of ship combat. And later, you know, actually someone at Toys for Bob, who is part of the open source endeavor, would say, you really should play this, Chris Nelson. You should play it for the story. And I said, what story? I was confused. I missed it. Um, the nice thing, I don't know, maybe sounds like such a platitude, but even if something isn't inspiring to the entire marketplace or whatever, but there are niche things. There are things that might go on to inspire someone to go do something else. And, you know, I think about that, like, you know, yeah, I have my influences, and now like it's generational, but say Earthbound is finally getting its comeuppance, you know, because I grew up and Earthbound exploded my brain as a kid. That was my kind of, I want to do something like this game. And I never did. And I don't think I ever will. But luckily, you know, other developers have come along and they had that experience, and I've gotten to play their game, and it's really cool. So there's a virtuous cycle of inspiration where someone's gonna be excited at what was either done, or saying, I see what was done, I want to take it and I want to see if I can climb higher or something like that. And I don't know, you've been doing this for a while. I'm curious if you have like a
Oh,
relationship with that.
we were huge Simpsons fans, the Fallout team. And there was a Simpsons where Lisa makes a doll called Lisa Lionheart, but it doesn't sell well. And so we used to say that line. It's like, well, if one little girl is inspired by this doll, then it'll all been worth it, especially if that little girl pays $40,000 for this doll.
Know exactly the episode you're talking about.
And we were like, yeah, some of our games weren't big sellers, but geez, if only those few people bought it and spent $40,000 each, it would have paid for itself. But I like to think that there are people out there who are inspired even by the non best sellers. So,
Well, Ur-Quan Masters wasn't a huge seller, so
really, because I bought it twice. I bought it in the when it came out, and then I bought it when it was bundled with the first one.
yeah, no, it managed to come out around the time that other sort of big games of the time came out, like Wing Commander, and I guess Doom was pretty much around then too. And
I played them all.
yeah,
They were all good.
yeah, they were good.
Yeah.
Those were good games, but yeah, it didn't do that well.
I tried.
Buy it more, come on. But we got Fallout, so you know, like, come on, can we really complain?
Yeah, I know I said it wrong in the video. I cannot overstate how influential it was. In the video, I said understate, and everybody called me out on it. I do that all the time. I say the wrong word, but I cannot.
Or did you? No,
I cannot overstate how much of an influence it was early on for me, and just to me, it was the perfect game at the perfect time. It's exactly what I wanted, exactly what I needed to be playing. When I then had an opportunity to make a game that just fell in my lap, I was like, this game, it's got to be like this game. The setting won't be the same, and it won't be the same kind of engine, and all the writing is different, but just like this game. So thank you very much for making it.
Oh, thank you for talking with us today too.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for the kind words. I didn't do anything. I'm just here to like revel. But thank you. Like, yeah, thank you for joining. I mean, thank you. I had I don't want to be totally wrong here, but I think I've played all of your games. I may be missing something in there.
Bard's
But
Tale
yes,
construction set?
no, no. But Fallout 2,
Grand Slam Bridge?
no. WildStar, yes. Pillars of
No.
Eternity, Tyranny. I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting in there.
Stick of Truth? The South Park game?
Yes, Stick of Truth. And
Just
there,
don't say what
I
you
didn't
did.
play the sequel. Well, I started it. I didn't finish it. There's too many games. You know what this is like. There's too
Yeah.
many games. You have to play.
My Steam library is full of half-finished games.
It's a nightmare. It's terrible. So,
It's a
but
real problem.
But I do want to. I do want to ask. Like, we can wind this down. And I appreciate all of your time. But like, you talk about wanting people to go make games so that you can play them. What are you looking forward to so that we can use it for our sequel and give it to you?
I want a really good single player RPG, or if people crack the cooperative story based multiplayer RPG that lets me make my character and have the game react to me. If it railroads me for a second, I get antsy. I want to be me in a world you make, and I want your world to react to me. See, it's very simple. That's all I want. That's all I want. So just do that.
You're living it right now.
Yeah. I'm gonna go get the monster manual. Hang on, time to draft a campaign.
That's all I want.
Okay, that's no big deal. We'll work on that.
Simple. I can
Wow.
say it in a couple sentences. It should be really simple to do, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, when you put it like that, that's easy. I think someone made that game. I think it's called Scribble Knots. Whatever you write, it creates. That's what you wanted, right? Like this is the beginning of a joke somewhere.
Just what I want. I don't know. These LLMs are getting really scary, what they can do. But
I played
maybe I'll
AI
have
Dungeon for a while, but it at a certain point it was more like, this isn't a game. This is a strange prison I'm trapped in with someone.
Well, but here's the thing though. Like a year ago, I got totally into Vampire Survivors for a couple of months.
Yeah.
I would never have asked for that game, but once I started playing that game, it was a game I wanted. So sometimes I just tell people, surprise me.
Okay, so what we'll do is you just said what you wanted. We'll have to do something totally different. This is like a reverse psychology. So, but I guess what I would say is it's cool after seeing so many games maybe not focused on that, feeling like, especially, I mean, we worked under Activision for a long time. And so like things like that kind of feel sometimes like, oh, well, they're not as popular right now. Kind of like RTS as a genre has sort of just fallen by the wayside. It's not as popular, but Steam exists and there's room for a million games like that. And I think it's really cool that like you're able to have a YouTube channel and even talk to us now and say, I just want games like this.
Yeah.
And even that game like that you're talking about, it's like, well, it's not by the numbers because there's no single answer, but Baldur's Gate 3. Would Baldur's Gate 3 have done well 10 years ago? I don't know.
I was told turn-based isometric RPGs were dead.
Yeah.
But what have I been playing for the last so many weeks? Baldur's Gate 3. So yeah, nothing's ever dead. It's just waiting for the next big hit. So that's all you have to do. Just make a big hit.
Oh, we'll get
My work here is done.
No, we're going for the Simpsons joke for this one, which is this game will mean something to one person. That's what we want.
You're making your Lisa Lionheart.
Lisa Lionheart.
And they even provided alternative names in that episode. Stupid Lisa Garbage Face, Hortense the Mule Face Doll. I mean, there's so many names that you can use.
Yeah, it actually just for this is, well, we could talk forever. I'm going to try to not do that, but the the catch joke from The Simpsons that caught on at Toys for Bob, and I don't remember when this caught on, but I actually think it was Chris Nelson who may have started this, but it was very catchy, was stepping on rakes. And as a Simpsons viewer, I don't know if that that me I saw your
Sideshow
face
Bob.
light up. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sideshow Bob, because we would talk about using certain tools and certain engines and feel like you're stepping on rakes. When we talk about UIs we don't like, it's like stepping on rakes. And so that phrase had a lot of power for a little while at Toys for Bob.
The best part of that entire thing is that scene was created because I believe they were 30 seconds too short and they didn't have time to do anything. So they just animated Bob stepping on rakes for 30 seconds and getting slapped in the face. And they just redid Kelsey Grammer's voice going, That's awesome. It's like, what is it? The necessity is the mother of invention.
Mhm.
So
yeah, there's one thing I just we've said this to a few people too, is we have different have a community around the game we're making, which is really cool, because the Ur-Quan Masters was big. And someone who's working with us from the community, I'm going to borrow his words, and he said, learning from you about how actual game development works sort of feels like you're killing Santa Claus in front of my eyes and telling me he did not only that he doesn't exist, but that you're like killing him. I may have embellished that.
that's super sweet.
Yeah,
Isn't that
was it,
sweet? I
was
know,
it a
but it's
first-person shooter?
well, that's a okay. We have Christmas songs. Why not Christmas games? Come on, it's time. Anyway, but the idea of what you just described, which is like actually some of the stuff that works best in a game. I woke up, I got out of bed and I said, this sounds silly, and tried it or whatever. Something needed to be there, and it turns out to work really well. So like even we brought up earlier, like the oars, that was Dan Quayle. Where do you draw your inspiration from? Anywhere that makes me feel good or whatever, or laugh. And then sure, afterward you talk about like, we were brilliant. We planned all of this out. No, we just kind of followed our hearts.
We've done so many interviews on Fallout where the person wanted a deep explanation of something, and it was like, oh, this made so and so laugh hard, so we put it in the game. And they're like, you can tell they're disappointed, but that's game development.
Yeah, but it is a true thing. I mean, Fred, I think you were talking earlier too about how you don't want to go into too much detail. And we've even talked about it, like, or I'm writing a blog post right now about I'm not going to answer this question, but what's the difference between fiction and fan fiction? But more simply, like, what's there for people enjoying the game or appreciating it to do? Because if we did all the work for them, then there wouldn't be anything for them to do. And something for them to do is to fantasize in their head. And if you want to use another Simpsons reference while we're on the roll, I sometimes send that clip of, what I'm talking about, where the fans come and ask the Itchy and Scratchy Show questions and say, excuse me, there was a discontinuity between this thing. Could you explain this? And Homer had to get up and defend the poor voice actors.
A wizard did it.
Yes, exactly. And so, I don't want, there's a spectrum in there somewhere of, especially we're making a science fiction game. We need a certain amount of tangibility to it, right? It has to be real and believable. But there's also parts where, I mean, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I hear the question about like, what's the bridge turning purple for the Melnorme for, and they would offer to answer it for 65,000 credits or whatever. And that's just one of those things where that as a question is 10 times more powerful answered by a player or whatever. Their answer is better. And I cannot express how much disappointment I had when I read the director's explanation of Donnie Darko versus my interpretation of it. I read it and I was like, that's what you meant? I wish I never read this. I don't believe you at all. This movie meant something different to me. So
Yeah.
like, as you said, people might be disappointed, but sometimes their explanation might be better than yours. It's fun as a creator.
We left some things vague in our games and fans argue about it to this day, and great.
It's great. Exactly.
It is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just pulled up that quote. It's, you all look like happy campers to me. Happy campers you are, happy campers you have been. And as far as I'm concerned, happy campers you will always be.
That's real.
That's real. That's the day.
And he said it to
Quayle
people
said
who
a lot
were
of weird stuff.
Well, okay, so here's the context. He was on an Asian trip. He stopped off at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. And oh no, and then at another refueling stop in America Samoa, uh, that's when he uttered the phrase, and to his own considerable delight, Quayle then declared it a school holiday in American Samoa. The Samoan children cheered.
That was a weird dude.
Yeah.
Well, now I forever associate Dan Quayle with the Oars.
Yeah. Now, didn't we just ruin it for you though?
Yeah, did we kill Santa Claus for you? Did we
Didn't
succeed in
ruin
this
it.
interview?
It provides another layer for me to think about. How's that?
What's the saying? It's not a forward move or a backward move, it's a lateral move. That's how we'll interpret it. Well, yeah, thank you so much for joining. We've been here for almost 2 hours. I could talk forever, but I don't want to eat up all your time. I mean, unless you want me to, I will.
I didn't realize how late it was. I kind of have to go.
Well, yeah, okay, we'll let you go. But did you have any questions for us before we do let you go? And other than me saying thank you so much, and
no, it was fun learning so much about the game that was so big to me, and also what's still happening, where you're going. It's really exciting. I'm glad you're still making stuff too, because I automatically kind of know I'll like it. So it's just, I don't think you go in directions I don't like.
Yeah, I think it will be comforting to you if you like the first couple.
Mm-hmm.
And we now have the name for our bad guy too.
Fred Cain.
Yeah, come on. You just right in our laps. You have to be careful. I mean, you don't know Fred well enough, Tim, but you have to be really careful what you say to Fred.
Did I hand over ammunition to an unloaded gun?
If there's a name that appears in the game now, you will know it is a loving, heartfelt twist.
I promise I will be a happy camper.
And a happy camper you will be.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you so much for
very
joining.
nice to talk with you.
Yeah, and appreciate all your kind words, and I love your YouTube channel too. Just by the way, speaking of getting people to make games, I love it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You guys have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
We'll be in touch. Bye.
Bye.